First Watch. This is a series in which we watch and review classic films for the very first time. Last week we talked about Steven Spielberg's film from 1975, Jaws, and today we are talking about Alfred Hitchcock's classic from 1960, Psycho. Alfred Hitchcock, one of the most famous directors to ever live. I think it's probably fair to say that Psycho is his most recognizable film, and I think one of the reasons why I haven't seen a lot of the movies that we're gonna, or all of the movies that we're gonna be talking about in this series, but especially Psycho, is the fact that this movie has been imitated so many times. It's literally been remade shot for shot by Gus Van Sant in 1998. It's one of the most referenced, talked about, recognizable films that's ever been made. So it's one of those movies that I hadn't seen it, but I kind of feel like I'd seen it just because so many of the scenes have been played on television and I knew all the story beats. So I think for the longest time, I'm like, I don't really need to. But then we started this series and I figured, what the hell? I turned on Psycho. It was on YouTube for free. So I gave it a watch, and yeah, let's jump right into it. I mean, Psycho, obviously, one of the most famous films that's ever been made. And so I came into this knowing quite a bit about it without having actually seen the film from front to back. And I guess where we'll start is kind of with Hitchcock's narrative choices here, because there's several scenes that stand out that everybody remembers from this movie that you probably know about even if you haven't seen it. But the thing that I want to just focus in on is the fact that this movie's most popular scene, the scene that's been referenced and parodied in a million different movies, whether you've seen Psycho or not, is the shower scene. And obviously, vintage scene. I mean, for 1960, that is one thing I'll say about this movie, like, for 1960, this movie gets away with a lot. I mean, if we're talking just the themes of sex, and I mean, there's even nudity. Isn't there, like, the rumor that there's, like, 1/3 of a frame that shows Janet Leigh's nipple? Not that that's necessarily important, but for 1960, like, that's kind of a big deal. Movies didn't really stretch those limits back then. But the reason that famous shower scene works is because this movie does something that, to this day, I feel like most filmmakers and most movies would be afraid to do, which is that it starts being about one character, and then with about an hour left in the movie, it turns out to be about another character. Now, said character, or the Janet Leigh's character, is consistently referenced throughout the movie, but it was a bold choice, by Alfred Hitchcock to famously do what they did to Janet Leigh's character, and it works. It totally works for a couple reasons, but the biggest one is the fact that the best character in this film, and the performance that you really can't take your eyes off, is Anthony Perkins. This is going to be a running theme throughout a lot of these movies that I watch, because a lot of my knowledge of old style filmmaking comes from, and maybe this skews my vision, comes from The Twilight Zone. I'm a big fan of the original Twilight Zone, Rod Serling episodes. Rod Serling's one of my heroes. And the reason I bring that up is because my theory, I think even some people would support this, is that acting prior to, like, I don't know, maybe Brando, but definitely the Pacino, De Niro era, like right around The Godfather, which we will watch here soon, people hadn't really figured out how to act yet. They still acted the way that people who were theater actors performed. It was much more broad and not nearly as subtle. And the reason I bring that up is because I feel like I'm going to have that issue with a lot of movies that I watch on here. I do not have that issue with Psycho. In fact, I would go as far as to say that relative to his era, I know we talk about that with athletes sometimes, but I feel like you have to do that with actors as well. Relative to the era in which this movie came out, I think it's fair to say that Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates, this is one of the greatest performances ever. I mean, this is, I think, a performance that has influenced so many different crazy performances that came after it. And when you are playing a character of Norman Bates' mental stability or instability, like I said, I feel like it'd be so easy to play it broad and, wide eyes, ooh, but there's a subtlety and a genuine creepiness to his performance. And actually, the positive actually almost leads to a negative, because I would say that one of the twists in here is so predictable that I almost can't even call it a twist. And the fact that Anthony Perkins is so good that the rest of the cast, I feel like, is just okay. Like, Janet Leigh's your typical, like, mid-Atlantic, accent main character, but all the stuff that really works is everything that involves Norman Bates and the Bates Motel. I mean, I think there's a reason why the legacy of that character and the legacy of that hotel, which ended up becoming a TV series on A&E, I believe, has kind of lived on more than anything else in this movie. The complaints I have about it, because I do recommend it, the complaints I have about it is mainly the fact that I totally understand why people saw this in 1960 and thought that it was a masterpiece. Watching it through the lens of a person who exists in 2025, it is very simple narratively, like, and simple can be very good. Like, I'm not saying I need big, convoluted premises, but I feel like in the modern age, films have a tendency to flesh out their characters a little bit more and give them a little bit more dimension. The only character that you feel like really has any dimension in this movie is Norman Bates, and he makes up for it by being, one of the more fascinating characters that cinema has ever seen. But I feel like if you remove Norman Bates and the impact that he has on this film, if you take him away, this is average. I mean, it's not bad by 1960 standards. It's completely fine. He just elevates. He's so good that he elevates the scenes that he's not in, even because his presence kind of looms large. The other criticism I have, and it's not really of the movie, it's just that, as I said at the beginning, this film has been parodied and imitated so often that while watching it, I would love to see somebody do a deep dive of all of the movies that were influenced by Psycho. And again, like, Psycho in many ways did it first, but as somebody who was watching it in 2025, the whole, like, ooh, he dressed like his mother, and the whole split personality thing, like, willing to suspend disbelief. But that's one of those tropes that's like, okay, movie magic here. Even in Fight Club towards the end, it got a little bit ridiculous. But in general, for 1960, you do have to view it through that lens, and I guarantee you it was really creative and really original. And that's the thing that kind of stands out about this movie and about a lot of Hitchcock's works is his originality. It is his boldness. And this is a movie that I'm not going to say that I loved. Is it something that I would repeatedly watch again? No. And ultimately, I think it seemed as though the intent of the film, or at least when it came out in 1960, was to scare people. And while I wasn't laughing at it, I found it more startling than scary. There's one really scary shot at the end, and the score, obviously, with the is very famous and startling. But besides that, I more appreciated it for what it's done for cinema as opposed to loved it, adored it. Like last week we reviewed Jaws. I just found Jaws to be, that was just a really entertaining movie. And I felt like the characterization was better. And I felt like just the way that it kind of hopped from beat to beat from a story standpoint. I think it's a really well put together script. This is obviously a very bold movie. It's a well put together movie. And it's definitely one I recommend, but I wouldn't call it one of my favorite movies. At the same time, to deny its relevance to cinema is insane. Like, just because it's not one of my favorite movies doesn't mean that I don't acknowledge that this is one of the most influential films that's ever been made. And so for that reason, I'm going to give it a 7. And that might seem low, but 7's good. 7, I fucks with a 7. I like a 7. Everyone in this house enjoys a nice 7, okay? Jesus. All right, yeah, I think that'll do it for this this review. What do you guys want me to watch next? We're going to continue to roll with this series. What do you think of Psycho? Should I review Psycho 2 and 3? And did they make a 4? I know they made a 2 like 20-something years after the original. Obviously not directed by Hitchcock, but they did bring Anthony Perkins back, and of course they remade this. Gus Van Sant did it shot for shot in 1998 with Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates. I mean, I know that's not a classic, but I feel like I should review that at some point, because, like, and I like Vince Vaughn, but Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates? Wow, okay. Anyway, if you want to check out all the content we do, you can go to CastellaniContent.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that little bell. That way you are notified every single time that we make a video. That includes podcasts, that includes movie reviews, that includes vlogs. Got some stuff coming down the pike, including interviews here later this week, and we're going to try to do something for the Lions playoff run as well. Hopefully that lasts a while. Appreciate you guys. What do you think of Psycho? Let me know in the comments. Make sure to subscribe. Peace and happiness.